Important public health. Okay.
Is Senator Leno? I see Senator Leno. Here to present Bill SB 731. Item number 9. Whenever you're ready, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm pleased to be able to bring you a bill that has no opposition. And it is quite simple in that it will require that welfare workers and caregivers, those who have a say as to where a child will be placed in our foster care system, that they consider the child's gender identity when we're placing them in our system. We know that those children who are gender variant, transgender, or otherwise are in particular at risk of rejection and bullying, physical abuse, sexual abuse. Their lives are very tough. When they find their way into our foster care system, their lives get even tougher. They face a lot of discrimination along the way. They're in our care. It seems to me it makes great sense that we respect and recognize their gender identity, no matter what it is, similar to that which is at birth or as they've come to know themselves, so that they can have every opportunity to be able to have a safe environment and to be able to reach their own dreams and aspirations, their own goals. We know their life is tough. We think we can make it just a little bit better. All this does is require that those who are going to be placing them consider the child's sexual identity as they make their placement. So I ask for your aye vote.
Move the bill. Second.
Thank you, sir.
Additional witnesses and support, please.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Shannon Wilbur. I'm the Youth Policy Director at the National Center for Lesbian Rights. Very pleased to ask for your support of SB 731 this afternoon. And I want to applaud Senator Leno for his efforts on behalf of an extremely vulnerable population. We know that transgender children and youth in the foster care system, like all children and youth in the foster care system, not only survive but thrive when they're supported and respected for who they are. This bill is absolutely consistent with very well accepted mental health and medical standards, all of which essentially recommend that transgender children are permitted to live in their affirmed identity. So I will just be brief and ask for your support of this bill this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll have additional testimony.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Josh Leonard. I'm currently the Executive Director of East Bay Agency for Children, an Alameda County-based nonprofit providing mental health, education, and social service supports to over 21,000 children and family members on an annual basis. However, my strong support for SB 731 is rooted in my 20 years of experience as a counselor, supervisor, and executive director in organizations providing residentially based services to foster youth. While working at Bay Area Youth Centers in Hayward, California, we began housing youth based upon their identified gender in the early 90s. At the time, we had developed a reputation for successfully stabilizing and graduating to positive outcomes LGBTQ identified youth with histories of multiple placements. For many, if not all, of the transgender and gender nonconforming youth that were referred to our program, conflict with caregivers about issues of gender identity and expression had played a significant role in previous placement failures. In our work with these youth, we found much higher rates of AWOLing. Sometimes this AWOLing was to escape rejection and harassment. Often this AWOLing was to street life in search of an affirming and non-judgmental community. Making the decision to house youth based upon gender identity felt for us to be the right thing to do, but it also made us much more effective in our work. This organizational policy made an important first impression on transgender and gender nonconforming youth when they came into our programs. It suggested to them the possibility that staff may be able to see them for who they really were and could be considered as possible resources for support. For some of the youth, that meant being resources to explore issues of gender identity and how to navigate related challenges with others in their lives. For many others, it meant being able to focus on the many other challenges that we're confronting as foster youth on the brink of emancipation. At the time, we were not really aware how alone we were amongst other residential providers in taking this approach. Though we believed our actions were not inconsistent with any statute or regulation governing our programs, over the years it became increasingly clear to us that while there were placement agency and community care licensing staff as well as other providers that had similar perspectives, there was widespread confusion about what was allowable and concern about the consequence of housing youth differently than the historic norms.
Thank you very much. I'll give you one more.
Thanks. SB 731.
Second to wrap it up.
SB 731 provides much-needed clarity on the issue. I'm excited the passage of the bill will direct and enable child welfare workers to ensure well-matched placements and will allow quality providers to organize their services in an appropriate and supportive manner.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we'll have a motion and a second. And I take the senator's word that there are no opposition, but I do allow one more testimony in support. So.
Diana Boyer with the County Welfare Directors Association. As the placement entity responsible for the safety, well-being of children, we're proud to be a strong supporter of this measure.
Great. And additional witnesses, please state your name and your affiliation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alice Kessler, on behalf of Equality California, we're proud to be a co-sponsor in support of the bill.
Great. Thank you.
Danielle Mollet, California Alliance of Child and Family Services, also in support.
Thank you.
Leslie Heim of Children's Law Center of California. We represent all of the children in foster care in both Los Angeles and Sacramento counties, and we're proud to be in support.
Matthew Gallagher on behalf of Mental Health America of Northern California, in strong support.
Thank you.
Amanda Wallner on behalf of the Los Angeles LGBT Center, in strong support.
Great. Thank you.
Mariah Watson on behalf of the American Civil Liberties Union of California, and we're in strong support.
Thank you.
Michael Radigan on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, Santa Clara County, in support.
Okay, great. Well, again, I would take the Senator's word there be no opposition, but I want to still ask for if there's anybody here that wanted to speak opposing this bill, please come forward. Seeing now, is there any questions from the members on the committee? Mr. Thurman?
Not a question, Mr. Chair. Just simply want to thank the author for bringing this important bill, all the sponsors, and of course speak to the outstanding work of the witness who is the executive director of a great agency for children that just so happens to be in the 15th district. It's an honor. Thank you.
All right. Great. Thank you very much. So we have a motion and a second. Senator, would you like to close?
Just to thank all of our co-sponsors and supporters, and thank you for your support today. Ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please call it.
Senate Bill 731 by Senator Leno. The action would be due pass to appropriations. Chu?
Aye.
Chu, aye. Mays?
Aye.
Mays, aye. Calderon? Aye. Calderon, aye. Lopez? Mainshine? Stone? Thurmond? Aye. Thurmond, aye. And the bill is out.
So the bill is out, and we'll leave it open for the members to add on. Thank you. Senator, next one we have Assembly Member Mullen. That will be AJ, item number 1, AJR 22.
Move the bill. Second.
Just missed you.
I know.
You did a great job.
Sorry.
Thank you. No problem.
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, presenting AJR 22. Poverty in California is serious, pervasive, and far higher than the official numbers suggest. According to the official poverty measure, 16% of Californians are living in poverty. This amounts to more than 6 million Californians living in households with incomes below the federal poverty level, about $23,000 for a family of 4. The Census Supplemental Poverty Measure, which incorporates California's high cost of living and the effect of safety net programs such as food stamps, suggests that California's poverty rate is even higher at 23.4%. While the federal poverty level for a family of four is around $23,000, the California poverty measure, another poverty measure that takes into account cost of living, indicates that in areas with a high cost of living such as San Francisco and my home county of San Mateo County, the poverty level for a family of four is more accurately around $35,000. The official poverty measure is used to determine whether a family is eligible for a wide range of federal programs, as you know, including but not limited to the Children's Health Insurance Program, Medicare, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs, and the School Breakfast Program. The method we use today was developed in 1964 and does not account for variations in the cost of living in different regions of our country, the increase in child care expenses, for example, and for variations in health care coverage and out-of-pocket medical costs. Low-income working families in California are especially disadvantaged by the official poverty measure due to California's high cost of living, which results in the denial of federally funded assistance to families living above the federal poverty line but unable to meet their basic needs. AJR 22 urges federal policymakers to reform the outdated and inadequate official poverty measure to better reflect poverty and unmet needs demonstrated by the supplemental poverty measure. With me today is Sarah Bone from the Public Policy Institute of California, as well as other supporters, and I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Bone. I'm a fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. And PPIC is a nonpartisan independent research institute, and as such, we do not take positions on bills before the legislature, but I am here to inform you today on the facts as I see them related to AJR 22. And as some of you know, PPIC, in collaboration with the Stanford Center on Poverty and Inequality, has been deeply involved in research on alternative poverty measurement for a few years now. I'll provide just a few minutes worth of background on the shortcomings of the official poverty statistics and offer an updated view of poverty measurement and poverty in California. According to official statistics, poverty is significantly higher, about 50% higher than it was 50 years ago when the war on poverty began. And as we shall see, I think that should be taken with a big grain of salt. Poverty status, as you know, is based on how family income compares to the federal poverty line, and that was developed in the 1960s as the first working definition of poverty in the U.S. It's based on family budgets of that time, when a typical family spent about a third of their income on food. And so the threshold was, simply put, about 3 times the cost of food. And while that was a novel use of facts and information available in the 1960s and was hugely important in creating a standard metric to inform policy, it's hard to apply that same measure today to modern families and derive any clear understanding of how families and how policy is actually doing. And there's 2 main reasons for that, which I'll summarize quickly. First, as you know, the cost of living and family budgets have shifted significantly since the 1960s, with families spending much less relatively on food and much more on housing, on work expenses like commuting and childcare, and also medical costs. And second, several government programs have changed and expanded and are not counted at all in the family income data used in the official poverty statistics. So for these reasons, official poverty measures are actually kind of hard to interpret. It's comparing, one part of family resources to an outdated benchmark. And so in a sense, it's like comparing apples and oranges. So 2 current measures, the Census Bureau's Supplemental Poverty Measure and the PPIC Stanford California Poverty Measure, which uses a similar methodology but provides a little more detail for the state. Both of the measures update and realign the basic poverty concept that's now about 50 years old. And I'd say that there's quite a lot of momentum and agreement from the research community on the benefits to these new supplemental measures. In summary, the methodologies aim to improve on official poverty measurement in a couple ways, which I'll quickly summarize. And the methodologies, just so you know, are based on the National Academy of Science expert panel from the mid-1990s that did recommend how official poverty measures could be changed. First, both of these supplemental measures use detailed data on what families actually spend on basic basic needs, rather than relying on a 1960s era approximation. They also allow for the cost of living to vary conservatively, depending on where you live. And so together, these first two improvements create a new poverty threshold that is, I think, more accurate and also that can be consistently updated over time so that we don't get into the same situation of having an outdated metric in the future. And then the last kind of major improvement is looking at a more comprehensive estimate of the resources families actually have on hand to meet their basic needs. That includes their cash income, which is the only thing that's counted in official poverty statistics, as well as near cash program benefits, taxes paid or credited, and net of necessary medical and work expenses. So in the last couple minutes or minute, I'll quickly summarize a few of the new insights as I see them from the supplemental and California poverty measures. First, let me return quickly to the idea of what are the effects of the war on poverty over the last 50 years. Using supplemental poverty measures, researchers find a clear downward trend in poverty over the last 50 years. And specifically, we identify that government programs reduce the poverty rate by 15 percentage points since the mid-1960s. Those are facts that can't be uncovered at all from official poverty statistics, which, as you may recall, I initially said would suggest that poverty rates actually rose 50%. Second, poverty in California today would be much higher were it not for the safety net. Our estimates suggest that without major programs like CalWORKS, CalFresh, the federal EITC, and housing subsidies, among a few other programs, nearly 40% of California's children would be in families without enough resources to make ends meet, or nearly 30% of state residents overall. And these are also metrics that can't be uncovered from official poverty statistics. Because many poverty programs use the federal poverty line, and as such are not scaled to the cost of living in different regions, their ability to materially affect family poverty varies substantially across California. In high-cost areas, safety net benefits reduce poverty by about 30%, but they reduce poverty rates by about 50% in the Central Valley and in the far north region of California. Poor families in the coastal parts of the state, which are the most populous, face costs $7,000 to $12,000 higher than the federal poverty line accounts for. And we actually find that poor families in those higher cost areas are more likely to be working and more likely to be earning slightly more than their counterparts elsewhere in the state. But those earnings are not enough to boost them above this kind of new updated threshold of needs. But it does make them less likely to be eligible for many safety net programs that are based on the federal poverty line. So updating poverty thresholds could actually improve the targeting of anti-poverty programs, especially in California, where poor families face substantially different costs depending on where they live. I think these examples just kind of scratch the surface of what's possible using tools of these new and alternative measures of poverty. We also, for example, hope to use our research to assess how changes.
Wrap it up. Just 15 seconds.
Okay. I would suggest simply that tracking poverty in this more accurate manner should be a regular contribution to the policymaking process. And for researchers like us at PPIC and even at the Census Bureau, we're still in our early phases and really rely strongly on policymaker awareness, interest, and on funding from a variety of sources to keep developing these alternative and better metrics.
Great. Thank you so much. Any more testimony?
Mike Carroll with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. And we certainly support this resolution, and we think it's absolutely important that Congress understand the importance of this. And it can't be understated, as Ms. Bones said, the impact, the difference that the supplemental poverty and the California poverty measure make when you look at how effective our programs are in California. Coastal areas of California have extremely high costs of living. They are increasing as we speak right now. In Mr. Mullins' district, the cost of housing is going up literally daily, it seems like, for all people on the coast. So being able to not only inform Congress about these needs, but also the policymakers here in this House about those needs is absolutely crucially important. And so I think not only is this helpful in terms of informing Congress, but I think as we go forward and make policy within the budget and in other arenas, it's important to keep in mind the true cost that it takes to house a family and to raise a family in California also. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Kevin Ansley and Coalition of California Welfare Rights Organizations. I want to publicly thank Arthur for bringing this wonderful measure forward. and to enlighten Congress and the legislature as to what the true situation of families in deep poverty have to endure. It is deplorable, and we support this bill. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any witnesses in support? Please come forward.
I thought you were on the Senate side, by the way.
Michelle Stoll-Parvensky, Children's Defense Fund, California, in support.
Andrew Shane, California Association of Food Banks, in support. Thank you.
Good. Is there any testimony in opposition? Any witnesses at all in opposition? Seeing none, we'll bring it back. Any questions at all? I do have one question. I also need to start off by saying that poverty is a major issue in California. In fact, I'm one that says I think poverty is probably our largest issue over the long term. We've got some temporary issues, but I think poverty is one of those that seems to be systematic, and it's something that I'm very, very concerned about. The one thing I'm a little looking for the right word here, maybe a little concerned with this resolution is the Census Bureau. They've got the supplemental poverty measure dated 2013, and talking about the poverty threshold between the official poverty measure and also then the supplemental poverty measure. Currently, under the official poverty measure, it's 3 times the cost of minimum food diet in 1963. Under the supplemental poverty measure, the mean of the 30th to 36th percentile of expenditures on food, clothing, shelter, and utilities of consumer units with exactly 2 children multiplied by 1.2. Interesting with that is, are we building in a system to where we have poverty noticed as 30% of society? So if we use the supplemental measure, are we saying that 1/3 will always be in poverty? Because when you read this, that's what it would suggest. Is then in essence, it's what we're talking about, sort of this class warfare. We've got the 1/3, the lowest, and that's considered poverty. And so I'm a little concerned about that.
That's picking up on some of the technical details, which are something that I think researchers continue to kind of hash out a little bit and look at more closely. What it is, though, is a pretty narrow set of items: food, clothing, shelter, and utilities. And it's meant to kind of change slowly over time, reflecting what people are actually spending on, kind of a narrow set of things. And then it's scaled up and down. It could be much lower for some places, depending on housing costs, or much higher. And then, takes into account a much broader set of resources so to compare it to. So in that sense, there's no guarantee that the bottom, 33rd will always be considered in poverty because of the kind of compensating resources on the other side. And in fact, using that actual spending data and the 33rd percentile gets you pretty close to what the federal poverty line is. Before you adjust it for housing, it's about $25,000, which is pretty close to what the federal poverty line, and this time is about $23,000, I believe, right now. So it's actually not significant.
Right, but even with that's today. But let's say, for instance, as a country, we began to produce, our GDP was going crazy. To say that 33% of our population is always in poverty, then I struggle with that. Poverty in 1963 is differently defined than it is today. And while I'm supportive, in fact, I often cite the supplemental number, because when you use that number, in large part because of the housing costs here in California, we're not doing as well as we should be. When you look at it in regards to quality of life or standard of living, I think the supplemental is a good measure. It's just, how do we define poverty? And it seems to me that I don't think the supplemental is exactly what it should be. I think there's a balance, but there's a question of how do you define that. Any more questions or comments? Yeah, Tony. Assemblymember Thurman. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair. And this isn't technical. It's just I appreciate that your measure is looking at educating members of this legislature, since it is advisory. And I would love to add on, by the way, to the measure. And I think the education piece is very important. I think it's very important to break out the facts in ways that show people this is a bipartisan issue. Regardless of your party, your race, your background. We have too many Californians who are living in poverty. And I think it's important for us to do that because we have all this debate about whether or not we should increase our wages. We have all this debate about whether or not we should, help families around the cost of child care. And I think if we start to break it out in detail, maybe we have a chance over the course of what might be 10 years or 12 years for some of the members to repeal the maximum family grant or to really support. Oh, are we discussing that bill today? Oh, okay. To really get somewhere on affordable housing, to really get Californians out of poverty, and to find it in ways that maybe not everybody's going to vote for it, but no one can refute that Democrats, that Republicans, that regardless of decline of state, regardless of your party, we got to lift all boats out of poverty. Thanks for bringing this measure.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, for the comments and my colleagues to the left. Just to note that the goal here is the ultimate goal is not to supplant the official poverty measure, but to use this supplemental measure in a meaningful way. It's born of a desire to really look in a clear-eyed way at the cost of living, which I hear from my constituents about regularly. This is about coming up with a formula, the feds, of course, coming up with a formula that really accurately takes costs into account and can be updated over time. And I think that is a key point here, that we need to modernize this, but also create a structure that is dynamic and takes costs into account over time to address your question. So with that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Great. We've got a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
AJR 22 by Assemblymember Mullen. The motion is be adopted to third reading file. True. Mays.
Aye.
Mays, aye. Calderon. Aye. Calderon, aye. Lopez. Mainshine. Stone. Thurman.
Aye.
Thurman, aye. The bill has 3 votes. It's on call.